It is. So OpenStack is huge, right? There's a lot of moving parts. There's all kinds of different ways people work. And by observing how others are doing their workflows, from attending the different project team gatherings and mid-cycles, I saw people work in a vastly different way than I do. So that gave me an idea for this talk, basically. So some terminology I'll use throughout it, which is specific to my and Dell's experience, is we call a stamp, which would be an isolated OpenStack cloud, which would be a rack of servers on an isolated network with a VM running Windows that allows you access into this environment. So you may have, N environments that I use as a hub and spoke kind of scenario. So I have one laptop where I keep my code and work against individual stamp. Jumpbox is just a Windows or Linux way to get into those isolated environments. And Python Virtual VNV is more on Daniel's side of things on how he works.
Yep.
So development environments, there's no right way of building a development environment. There are infinite combinations of way you can do your workflow. But we're all basically doing the same things, right? We get the code. We want to make some kind of change to that code or fix a bug. We deploy that change and see if it works. If it doesn't work, we repeat that process. So here's a basic diagram, right? Somewhere in there should be some unit testing too. I didn't put that in the graph. I should have. But it's a circular thing. You write a little code, you push it to a server, it's broken, you try it again, iterative process over and over. The methodology I use is like a hub and spoke. So my laptop has all of my source code and all of the tooling I need in order to make changes to that code and push it to these isolated OpenStacks. Another team member of mine, actually he's sitting right there, Rick, I should have co-credited you. He uses more of a thin client. So he uses RDP into his Jumpbox, and all his code exists there. So he's basically just using his laptop as a thin client, and he's primarily focusing on ironic drivers against real hardware. So he doesn't need to talk to a lot of different environments. He's focusing on his one environment, so that works very well for him. If you're doing pure upstream development on, say, projects like Heat, or you're working on Career now, using a DevStack wrapper might be the way to go.
So yes, so let me speak a little bit about what DevStack wrapper means. I'll be speaking a little bit about this later on, but just in case you don't know, all the Upstream CI works on DevStack, which is a simple project to get all in one, or maybe a small OpenStack. So when I try to develop Upstream, I try to stay as much as I can, as close as what the gate would do. So that's why I just decided to get up a DevStack on my own and do all my work in there. We'll get into that afterwards.
Sure. So again, going back to the hub and spoke, all the code exists on my laptop. I clone all the repos locally. Code is modified locally. Changes are tested to a specific stamp in the lab, and that's done by synchronizing the code. So I'll have the code local, and I'll use the tool WinSCP, pushes the code out to the remote environment, and I test that way. And in the end of the day, my commit is made locally using Git tools for Windows, and actually use Git review right through Windows. I was a Java engineer for a long time, so Eclipse is still my IDE of choice, and that's what I'm used to, so that's what I use. Here's a diagram of what I was talking about on how I support a variety of different environments with a single laptop. So I can test one code change against and stamps, which can all be different generations of hardware, for instance, would be a reason to do that. Benefits, it's flexible. If I want to start working on a new stamp, all I have to do is get a couple of IP addresses, and I can remotely get into that stamp and get my work done. Some of the drawbacks are you can lose work. If something happens to my local laptop, I could possibly lose work. Syncing changes to the remote environment is an extra step, whereas working right in the source and committing right from sources is easier. And the dev environment for me is Windows, which some consider a big drawback. But the thin client workflow I was describing earlier just uses the jump box to run RDP. And I believe you use the Samba share to, you don't use Samba share. You could potentially use the Samba share to link to the Linux environment. So the code is checked out into that share. He's working in Eclipse through the jump box, and the code is committed on that Linux machine. Here's a diagram, basically, of that kind of workflow. Benefits. The VM, the work environment is a VM, so it could be snapshotted and restored. There's no syncing required. He's working directly on the code base. Development can be done for any machine that can reach that jump box. So if, say, I needed to work on something on his environment, all I need is RDP credentials and I could get there. Drawbacks, you don't have the code locally, so if you wanted to push to other environments similar to how I work, it would be a little more difficult because you'd have to set up a similar environment in each case. Next slide.
Okay, so let me also explain a little bit what my kind of environment is like. So I mainly would, you could even in this call, some kind of a sync client, but rather than connecting to the client, I just connect to the machine and I do all my work up there. I usually just prefer to use an OpenStack cloud to use the development for OpenStack because otherwise, the laptop would just take off. If I just started getting a DevStack currently, what we use for Kubernetes, it would eat all 8 gigs what an Upstream node would use. So any laptop would get quite hot. How do I do that? I usually just use Vagrant as a way of orchestrating my machines. So let me get you through this. This is a Vagrant file, and for the ones that you don't know what this thing is, this is a file that is being used by Vagrant to deploy your VM. So here I'm using 2 plugins to select where would I like my VM to live into. So the first one is libvirt. Vagrant usually it doesn't use libvirt as default, but I do prefer to use that one. So that would be living on my local laptop or I don't know, desktop or wherever I'm doing my work into. And I usually use that one to work offline. So by working offline, I mean I just could be on a plane, especially tomorrow. I'll be having a 14 flight, so I'll be definitely using the third one. You can decide whether to configure your libvirt box or whatever. I usually use Fedora for development, and I like to have 3 APs because I like to have 3 different networks, like a management, network, and a few more, but you could have whatever you want. So I'm using libvirt 8 gigs, and it just boot up. But if I have connectivity, I would like my laptop battery to last as much as I can. So I don't usually develop locally. Rather than that, I'm connected up there. If you look at the line number 4, I'm just loading all my configs from a YAML file. So those are the credentials for the OpenStack cloud. And when this is done, it would just create my VM on the OpenStack cloud I'm working into. In this case, it's RDO cloud. And afterwards, what I'm doing, I'm just installing DevStack. I won't mind whether this is local or remote. I have a set of Ansible playbooks that would just get my configs and make it work for me. And by my configs, I mean that I have a repo called .files, and I store my Vim log configs there, Vim plugins, Git configs, Teemo configs, because I heavily use Teemo for that, and all of this. And after, hopefully, about 30 minutes, I will have a developer environment that I could use on the fly. And this is really convenient for me because, I don't know, for whoever are here on this room, how many things have DevStack been broken for you? Like a lot, I guess. Okay, so if at some point your DevStack gets totally and utterly broken, this is quite helpful because you can say, okay, go to hell DevStack and just recreate it on the fly. And as I do my environment, basically upstream, so I do usually commit as much as I can. I do Git reviews. I do want to see what the patch has been up into. So I get into status.openstack.org. I'll be going through a commit process afterwards. Everything is upstream, so I don't need to really store any code locally. And I could recreate this as much as I can. So let me just hop into here. Let me open the terminal. Okay, can you see this, or is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just my local set of Ansible playbooks. So you can see the background file that we were speaking about here. I have a bunch of roles, pretty easy. I guess one of the things that every Upstream developer do is create a kind of Ansible playbook base or bash that would deploy DevStack for them. So I have this DevStack plugin task. So this is quite straightforward. It just install everything, updates, install tokes, git review. It clones DevStack, and afterwards, what I'm using, just in case you are not familiar with local.conf, please feel free to stop me. But if you are, what do I have here is just a template, Jinja templates for the local.conf. So for instance, in this case, this would install Octavia and query Kubernetes, and this is generated on the fly. Once that this is done, and you would end up with an Octavia and query Kubernetes DevStack environment. So let's assume this went well. Also, yes, FYI, what I'm doing, I'm not storing any kind of private SSH key inside the VM. What I'm doing is I'm exporting my local key. So if this is not done automatically by your bash environment, you just would need to do this. And this would add your local SSH key to SSH agent, and it would export it to the remote VM whenever this is called SSH. Okay, so we are here. I usually just go ahead and I create the Teemo session. So I already created it.
So you just SSH'd into the DevStack instance running in RDO Cloud.
Exactly. So, I mean, I usually just created it before, but as this takes like 30 minutes, I don't think we would be having time. So I created that on the fly beforehand. So now, I mean, Teemo is really useful because it allows you to stay connected there, because I might have some connectivity issues and my session would still be there. Some people do prefer a screen, some people do prefer Teemo, but it's basically just up to you whether to decide. So you could also put it there and use different windows, and it would just stay there. So DevStack usually clones every repo here on /opt/stack. So let's assume that we want to do a new commit for query Kubernetes because it's a cool project and everybody's so fancy about it lately. Here, one of the things that maybe a new contributor wouldn't be familiar with, and if he's not, he should be becoming as much as familiar as he can with it whenever he starts, it's tokes. I guess that the infra guys have been speaking about tokes lately in almost every session, at least in the 2 sessions that I was into this summit. But basically, tokes is a tool that allows you to create Python virtual environments and do some testing on the fly. And this is really helpful and handful because you might really screw up with the Python requirements if you start doing something and working in several projects. So let's assume that my cool patch requires a version of a library who would collide with another project. So the first thing that you would do would be creating the Python environment. And I'm not running any tests here, I'm just creating the Python environment. Oh, sorry. I was typing it in the web terminal. And this would just install all the dependencies that I would need to, and would create it. OK, done. So this has activated the VM. And now we could do and use pip as much as we can. So we could do pip install now IPDB because I like it to use for debugging.
And so the reason behind this is so you won't get any package version collisions with something
Exactly.
else.
So let's assume that I'm working on different versions, or maybe I would like to try that I'm using a new Python package version for my project. But if I just go and install this as a global requirement, maybe I just go ahead and crash all my environment, and I don't want to.
Right.
So then we'll be creating what we call a topic branch. In this case, I went ahead, and this is called my cool patch, so not that much original. And then we will just be using one of those Git tools that David was speaking about, which is called Git Review, to set up the thing for ours. This is basically going to set up a remote to the Garrett, so we'd be able to go and put our patches. Here I did quite a stupid patch, so let's go ahead and add a new file to our patch. And as I said before, I don't want my work to get lost if something happens to this VM, so I just go ahead and do Git review. Oh, OK, well, at some point, well, this should have worked, so it's a demo effect. But if everything went well, this would have just gone and created a new patch set.
Do we have anything open? Do you have any open patches in Garrett or?
Yeah, I got a few. So, but I guess maybe we can show them afterwards.
Yeah, you probably don't.
Yeah.
Probably don't. One thing we would want to do in this case is the Git review. It's now in a live state. What you would want to do is go to Garrett and set it as a -1 workflow. So it's not going to be reviewed and go through the CI process, because it's basically just
actually that's a good advice, because I mean, I'm such a good developer that people just tend to merge my patches before they are
one
even
review.
ready.
Right.
So I usually tend to put up some comment on the commit message that said
They just see his name and they
do not merge or whatever. And this is funny because I forgot to do that because of the jet lag, and I got one of my patches getting merged before it was ready. So then that broke all the gates, and I stayed up until 2 a.m. fixing them. So please use workflow -1.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you are working remotely on your plane. You have it running in your KVM. You have DevStack running. You're doing your work.
Yep.
And you have other changes that you've done remotely in RDO Cloud instance. How do you sync that stuff?
What I do is even before going to the flight, as I have all my work inside online on the Garrett.
So you pull it all down?
I pull them down, yeah.
Okay.
So you could even use, there's a tool called Garrett TOI that you could use to pull up.
What's it called?
Garrett TOI. Let me show you. I don't know if I get that configured here, but let's give it a try too. So you can. This is a little bit outdated, but this is basically, you can add a Garrett repo here, and you would be able to basically use this to do offline voting and patches for whatever you want.
So your Git review is right there.
Exactly.
And
And it's
you can
offline.
suck it right in.
Yeah.
That's
I can download the patch. I can do so. If you merge this Garrett TTY
Yep.
with my offline DevStack mode, you could just pull all the changes that you liked and then go ahead and go to your 14-hour flight.
very cool. So I wish that I could do more things like this, but with bare metal, a lot of what we're doing at Dell is it's all work against bare metal, different generations of bare metal, and it's hard to get this kind of, this workflow is so much superior, but it's hard to get to that with what we have to do.
No, you're doing it wrong. So that way. So again, the benefits of this is that basically you are able to destroy. I mean, let's say that I'm not so I set a good developer and I screw up badly, so my DevStack environment becomes unusable at all. I could just say, okay, go to hell, destroy the VM, and recreate it while I just get a coffee because of the jet lag. So the drawbacks is that, as I was telling to David, I just do my develop using Git and Garrett heavily, but there might be some kind of developers who aren't really used to that kind of workflow and that prefer just to use a usual IDE. I don't really care what kind of IDE do you use. If you'd rather use Eclipse or Python, which is given to you for free if you're an OpenStack contributor, just in case you didn't know. But another variation of this workflow, and this is something that a lot of people also do use, is to actually do an rsync from the remote work to a local folder, and then have your work doing locally, but being rsync to the one in your VM.
Yeah.
So that's another option. Mm-hmm. You can use Samba, NFS, but rsync is the most common case.
Yeah.
Again, maybe that would fit you a little bit more.
Yeah, I do some similar with WinSCP. It's just a different GUI-driven tool for doing the same kind of thing. For doing Python in Vim, is there code completion and that kind of stuff for Vim? Do they have a plugin for doing that?
Yeah, actually, I didn't show, but I can do. I'll speak just a little tiny bit about the kind of Vim plugins that I'm using. So, okay, let me search. I don't care. I'm just going to open a file here. Vim, oh no, OSS.py. So I have quite a few plugins. Then this is the first one, that's why I wanted to open a new file. So whenever I open a new Python file, it automatically adds the Apache 2 license,
Gives you the
and
header.
then gets you the credit to Red Hat. Okay, it's cool for now, but let's see in the future.
Right.
And let's do some kind of
We're
thing.
getting a little close on time. We should.
So I'm just importing here one of the default Python modules. And once that I get here, I really don't care if I have an IDE or not, because I could do basically all the things. Let's do, I don't know, always, whatever. I don't care whether this is right or not. I'm actually doing it wrong intentionally. And then one of my plugins is going to go and do a flake 8 test about the consistency on all the Python code.
Syntax.
Yeah, all the
checking.
code syntax.
Pepe.
Pepate automatically. So let me do, and I guess I'll be finishing with examples when this is done. Go quickly over my Beam RC. So I'm using Bundle as a Vim plugin manager, which is basically a way to go and install a lot of plugins. So what do we have overall as things that a developer would be interested into would be like Fugitive. Fugitive lets you integrate with all the Git things. So you could do Git blame, Git diff, and whatever you'd like to, yes, from within Vim.
Mm-hmm.
You would also build Git Gather, which basically it sets up a file or a notification whenever we have a modification in our code, plus, minus, or changed. Cool. And we have Flake 8, which is the one that gets also the Flake 8, PEP 8 indent, so quite a bit ready for the code completion. I guess that's a cool thing that allows you to use fully Vim as an IDE.
Cool. We're going to have to kind of blast through the last of the slides, I think. Yeah, so test target. So at the beginning we talked about you have some goal in mind, whether it's to fix a bug or add a feature, and then you need some test environment to make that happen. Either bare metal, or if you're working on something in Nova and you have a new Tempest functional test, you could probably get away with using a dev stack of some sort. Your work requires a full OpenStack deployment. We do tons of bare metal. We have lots and lots of bare metal stamps. As Daniel has explained, dev stack's an option, but there's a variety of different ways you can stand up OpenStack on a single node. Pack stack, I think OpenStack Ansible will do a single node deployment as well.
Well, Packstack is deprecated, but a lot of it can be used as proof of concept. You could develop using that. You could even let's say you like containers, you could use OpenStack Helm, Cola, whatever. So there are a ton of options, really.
Right. And depending on what you're doing, also the size of your cloud it's heavily dependent. We do a lot of performance testing against full stamp, so we have to necessarily have a lot of equipment to drive to see what kind of performance we're getting. We already pretty much covered this with what you were talking about. Tooling, as Daniel pointed out, he likes Vim. A lot of the stuff I use is Windows driven, so Eclipse, Notepad++ is a tool I'm a big fan of. MOBA Xterm is an excellent Windows tool. In fact, for MOBA Xterm, I can have SSH terminals open to a dozen different stamps, and I can just tab through them and do work on any of those at any time. It's a very useful tool. This is just a recap on some of the stuff that I use. Blueprints. I think we're out of time to actually get into writing blueprints because I wanted to give some time for questions. We end at 4 sharp?
I guess we still have like 10 minutes, if I'm correct.
What's that? Oh, 10 past 4.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got time for blueprints. So blueprints are created in Launchpad. Launchpad is where bugs and blueprints are traced. The functionality for creating a blueprint is very limited. You basically just have a paragraph or more. So what most projects do will create a stub blueprint in Launchpad and then have another repository or in their own repository have specs where you can elaborate on what your blueprint is, and it can go through the whole Garrett review process.
Also, one of the things that I think we should comment here is that depending on the project, they can require either a blueprint, a spec, or both. Being the spec a more technical discussion about that topic.
Yeah.
But as David pointed out, basically, most of the projects, they do have also a separate project for blueprints. So in case, in OpenStack, everything is a commit, and everything is a Git repo, even the time of the meeting. So if you want to change the time of a meeting, you gotta go and do a commit against a new repo.
Right.
I just wanted to quickly, before we run out of time, to point out how it's this comes straight from the OpenStack developer guide, but I just wanted you to be aware of what's the life cycle of a commit. So first you go and, let's say I'm a Nova developer, I just clone my upstream code to my local environment. I go and create my topic branch, then I do my code, do my things, then I go for a Git review, then, well, this is outdated, it shouldn't be Jenkins anymore, so there's now there's only Sul. But Sul would bolt to my patches, and so would be like another contributor. So usually normal contributors will just give you +1, -1, and if a core reviewer gives you a -1, if you don't care and you continue your thing, you'll get a -2, and then that to be an issue. And once that this is done, at some point, let's say we are all happy, it'll go and it'll get merged against master.
Some things to keep in mind with the patch submission flow is smaller is better, right? So try not to make large commits because you'll get more negative response from the community. The smaller your patches are, the better luck you will have getting it reviewed and accepted. One of the ways to achieve this is to set up Git review dependencies. So you set up your first topic branch, which deals with one concern. You Git review, and then you do a -D on the next one that will reference that one. So then you're setting up a dependency tree of reviews. So you have smaller reviews that you can people can address in smaller chunks. I know my first pass at doing one, I submit this huge patch, and it was very unpopular. So that was
because that basically makes the reviewers impossible to really review the patch. So how would you review a patch that is, I don't know, 1,000 lines? Do you just say, okay, I trust you, +1, or I don't trust you, and
right.
make this in small patches, -1.
Right.
Regarding this topic, and I guess we are almost done too, so you could either do dependent commits on the same project or dependent commits on different projects. So Sul allows you to do cross-project dependencies. So you could say that your patch on Career depends on another one in Neutron.
Right.
But just overall, you should really be careful about that because when you update your patch, it will also update all your dependent patches. And this could get really, really, really messy real soon.
You get into rebase.
Exactly.
Rebase hell. Right. Any questions?
So now we are all jet lagged, and that everybody has its own way of developing for OpenStack. So we might even have as many different ways of projects are about more than 300. So I hope that this would be at least would have served you to check the way that two different kind of development do. If there are no questions, then thanks a lot for attending. That's it.
Thank you.